I like to, all right, so I got Rob. Usually Rob is let me just see something. So usually Rob helps me with all of this, and I'm trying to pull it off on mine. So Rob's telling me to okay, so Rob's in the private chat. I see that. All right, so Rob's in the chat and stuff. All right, Father Calvin Robinson.
Hello.
Been a long time coming, right? We've been going back and forth for a long time. And we finally were able to pull it off. Before we even get going, everybody please hit like, subscribe. I'm not sure where this conversation is going to go. We may, if we start diving into sensitive topics, we may jump over to locals only. So we'll see how the conversation goes. But I figured just to start off, I've heard you on a whole bunch of different shows, but I've never really heard like your upbringing. Like, were you raised in the Anglican tradition? And I kind of want to know because I've kind of seen you evolve more towards a Latin version of Christianity over the past year or two. It seems, I don't know. So maybe I'm wrong on that. So what were you raised as? And how has your faith kind of changed over the past few years?
I was raised in the Church of England before it went entirely woke. Of course, it was still quite woke even then, but nominally Christian growing up. Parents are both Christians. Grandparents far more Christian than my parents. You know, it's that generational gap. But I came to know Christ through the Eucharist in a mass in an Anglican church, and that's very important for my faith journey because it tells me that Christ can reach us anywhere, and also it brings into question certain politics of the church, right? But I came up through Anglicanism. I was an Anglo-Catholic. You know, my sending priest who sent me to seminary and my training, the people all around me have always been Anglo-Catholics as well until recently. Not recently now, but until I left the Church of England, which is 3 years ago now, and then I was exposed to a whole wide world of evangelicals as well. So Protestants, people of low church denominations, people who are also Anglicans but of the low church prescription, and just a broad range of Christians that I wouldn't have necessarily have engaged with if I was still in my Anglo-Catholic bubble of the Church of England. And so I think there's a bit of divine intervention at play there, exposing me to different forms of Christianity or people with different traditions. But of course, also I've been doing a lot of work with the Roman Church as well, or people in the Roman Church, which would have been probably a little bit more restrictive if I was still in the Church of England too. So I've just been, I think my path has led me on a journey to, I know ecumenism is a dirty word for you trads, but just engaging with Christ's body in different ways.
I think ecumenism, okay, so let me back up a little. Around how old were you when you had that experience with the Eucharist?
Oh, I was in my early 20s, so this is my adulthood. Yeah, all throughout my life, I was searching for Christ without knowing it. Yeah. Sometimes explicitly searching, but other times searching ... But it was in my early 20s when I encountered him in the Eucharist.
So when was it that you kind of took where you hit like the national stage, where like what was the first thing that happened where people were like, oh no, this guy's a problem, we have to take care of this?
I think there have been different times. Before I got into ministry, I was in education, and I used to write about what I was seeing in education. I used to write about the left-wing indoctrination that is rabid in our schools, especially in our state schools over here. And so I got into some trouble publicly for that. But I think probably internationally, it was my Oxford Union speech that really raised the profile on what I was trying to say. But that was different. That was a very different time. You know, I started off speaking about education way before I had a public ministry.
Yeah, we were making the joke before we even came on. We were like, we should pretend you're coming on to argue for reparations, right?
Yeah.
Like, in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day today.
I did a debate. So before the Oxford debate, I did a Cambridge Union debate. Very, very similar format and everything. And it was, this house believes in reparations. Was it from the church or from the state? Anyway, I was arguing against it, obviously. And that was very interesting. Completely different response to the Oxford Union debate, in that in the Oxford Union, people were silent and hostile, or mostly silent and hostile. It was a very negative atmosphere. In Cambridge, they were physically agitated. You could see their demons being upset by the truth being spoken.
Yeah.
It was fascinating to see.
Yeah, you don't fit inside of a mold, right? Like
Right.
man, they want to put everybody into a box, and they see you are a black guy and you're supposed to toe a certain line. And once you step outside of that, it's shocking to people that
But
you
we
are.
all do that, Anthony. All of us do. You know, we're supposed to fit into a Christ-shaped mold, but actually, we all want everyone else to fit into a mold that we recognize. You know, every day I get people tweeting me, "Come home, go to Rome." Like,
Yeah.
okay, answer the question, why? What would you personally get from it, or what do you think I would get from it? Or I get people saying, you know, avoid Babylon, the whore of Babylon, which is the Roman Catholic Church, and you know, people all want me to fit into their little boxes. So even within the church, it's not just people in politics who say, oh, he's got brown skin, therefore he must be left wing and must subscribe to critical race theory. All of us do it. We all want people to fit into our narrow little boxes that make the world make sense to us.
Well, okay, so okay, so maybe we can get into, like, because you coming up in the, like, you said you were like an Anglo-Catholic, right?
Yeah.
So how has the Anglican Church changed over time, because you weren't ordained in the Anglican Communion, though, right? Like, you wound up going outside of the Anglican Communion to get ordained, right?
Yeah. So I got ordained by the Old Catholics, the Union of Scranton, from the Utrecht line, which, I mean, it's neither here nor there, but essentially it's just, as far as I know, it's the only group outside of the Eastern Orthodox that are recognized by Rome. And that, for me, again, that ecumenical bridge is important, of not just being having a public ministry, but having a public ministry that is universally recognized is very helpful for the kind of work that I do.
So do you think if it was maybe a different papacy we were under, that you would have chosen a different path? Or do you, like, it's really
That's a good
people that
question.
yeah, because people that see you, they're I see that they do that to you. They constantly coming down on you. Why aren't you Catholic? Why aren't you Catholic? But as an
Yeah.
outsider, I mean, I try to see things from others' point of view. Like, if you had tried to get ordained in the Catholic Church, you would not have been able to exercise the ministry you wanted. Like, there's no way they would just, because I speak to
I get it.
Gavin Ashenden,
Yeah.
and he tried to come in through the ordinariate, and they wouldn't even allow it. So do you think if it was maybe under a Benedict papacy, you might have chose a different route?
So I get the first part of your point, and I had coffee with Gavin the other day. He's a great man. It's a shame what the church has done to him, but I see that everywhere, especially in England. They don't like prophecy. They don't like priests to be prophets. They don't like prophetic speaking. They don't like people who stick their heads above the parapets. They want people to keep their heads down. The church is currently, in England, the church is currently burying its head in the sand in ostrich mode, which is a massive shame, because the Church of England is imploding. So the Roman Catholic Church should be stepping forward to reclaim souls for Christ. However, that's neither here nor there. To your second question, no, I don't think the papacy makes a difference, because I can appreciate the papacy from a perspective of, I'm an Englishman, I'm a monarchist. I love the monarchy as a institution, as a tradition, a Christian tradition. I think it's important for our way of life over here, but I don't like King Charles III. So I can respect his seat, I can respect his office, without liking him as a person. So I can completely see how people who are in full communion with Rome do not like Pope Francis, because they see him for the monster that he is. However, they respect the seat of Peter and the seat that he currently occupies, if they believe that he occupies it. And this is the greatest shame of his papacy, in that he is causing more division than we've seen in a long time. And I think actually it might end up in schism.
Yeah, I do too. I don't think there's any other way that it can end, because it's a sad thing, because the principal point of unity for Catholics is the papacy, and right now the papacy is causing the most division. But what you have is people that do have that respect for the papacy that you're talking about aren't leaving the church. But now, if we get a pope to the right of Francis, which I hate using even the left-right paradigm, but that's kind of the dialectic that has been foisted upon us over these past couple of years. But if we get somebody to the right of Francis, I think the people that are the biggest Francis supporters now will leave, which is kind of what I think is going to happen. I think you're going to get I think Francis is a one-off, and I think you're going to get a better pope, for lack of a better term, after him, and that you're going to see a schism happen after that.
But all of this is good, actually, because Christ uses bad situations for good, and this is quite a sanctifying process for the church. Because I think for the last couple hundred years, the papacy has acquired more authority than it is due. And I fully recognize primus inter pares. I fully recognize the Pope as the first among equals in the bishops. But situations like what happened with Strickland shouldn't be possible, because Strickland's authority, as with all the bishops, comes directly from Christ. But the papacy has been made into an all-encompassing authority in areas that the Pope doesn't have authority. He does have authority in some areas, but he's taken authority in areas that he doesn't have it, and that's not Francis's fault. That's authority that's been granted because there have been a few good popes, and people have been looking to the Pope for leadership in areas that they don't necessarily need to, because the church is bigger than just the Pope. The magisterium is there for a purpose. But anyway, that's all church politics. But to answer the question about me personally, I pray and discern through everything, and both the Lord and Our Lady have led me to the path that I'm on, and I didn't choose it. I never would have expected it. I didn't know this path was a possibility, but I'm here at the behest of Him. And so when individuals, I'm all up for challenge, but when individuals challenge it from their personal perspective, I always flip it back around and say, as I said, to what end? Other than getting a trophy of saying, oh yes, we got Calvin Robinson on our side now, other than that trophy hunting that a lot of Roman Catholics do, to what end? Other than perhaps, like you suggested, silencing my ministry.
Well, I would say the only reason it should never be trophy hunting, and I don't think anybody should become anything unless they believe it's true, right? Like it's not if you don't believe something is true, what's the point in doing it? So when people ask me why I'm Catholic, it's because I believe it's true. So because I heard you on with, I think it's that kid Redeemed Zoomer, and he was talking about church unity, and you were like, well, the only possible path I could see for unity would be under Rome. It was a comment that you had made that made, that kind of shocked
don't get
me
me wrong. I do see Catholicism as true, but I also see Orthodoxy as true. And I don't think the truth can be contained, because I think Christ instituted one church, right? But we have divided the church. We have divided His body, and we pray every week in the intercessions in church for church unity. All of us do, no matter our denomination. But that church has to come together. And yes, truth is in the Roman Catholic Church. Yes, truth is in the Eastern Orthodox churches. But all of that truth needs to be united. I don't think anyone has an explicit kind of chokehold on the truth, because Jesus Christ is the truth, and we can't put Him into our little boxes. So that's not to suggest that one thing is more true than the other, or neither of them are true, but just that we have to find a way to be able to see that truth in order to reunite it, because it's our job to reunite His body.
Yeah, I see. You have to put Catholicism and Orthodoxy in a different place than you would put the different Protestant denominations. Especially when you start getting rid of sacraments, like a non-sacramental Protestantism is a drastically different faith and religion from ancient Christianity. So, did you always have a devotion to Our Lady, or is that kind of a newer thing?
Oh yeah, always. I've been on pilgrimage to Walsingham every year. But in to your points of Protestant denominations, yes, I think the further away you get from the truth, the less truth you maintain, right? So that's not to say that the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that Christ is present in these what do they call them, ecclesial bodies, right? But not wholly present. And of course, so some of these denominations do have some of Christ, they have some of the truth, but not all of Him. And so that's again another thing to pray for. But you're absolutely spot on in that the moment you remove the sacraments, you're removing Him really and presently. So that is when it becomes a much bigger issue. But Anglicanism is a weird gray area, because where I came from in Anglo-Catholicism, we had the sacraments, we had apostolic succession. Again, we can get into political decisions about whether that's valid or not. But the intention and the form, if they are there, and if Christ is present there too, then it's all about how can we see this from a wider, broader perspective, I think, without watering anything down. And the only way to do that is to pray through it.
I think a lot of people, like watching you over the past couple of years, I don't look at it like Catholics are looking for you as a trophy. It's that you're a voice of reason in the chaos, and of course people want you to be on their team. You know what I mean? It's like and for Catholics, look, especially there's a how would I say this? It's almost like if Catholics admit that there's other Christian religions, or oh man, I don't even know how I would say that. It's just they want the church to be one. Let's just say that, right? So they want the church to be one. So when you're looking even at orthodoxy, I mean, if you look, even the church teaches that the Orthodox have valid apostolic succession, they have valid sacraments. There should be a different conversation between us and the Orthodox, or even us and like someone like you, than I would with a Protestant, especially so much of Protestantism today is like an American brand of Protestantism. It's like this 100-year-old thing where it's rock music and a strange thing. So, all right. So now what was the whole debacle you dealt with on, what did you work with? GB News?
I did. Yes.
And what was the whole debacle with Lawrence Fox? Because I kind of saw that from a distance. I didn't know what was going on there. They let you go? And
Lawrence said something he shouldn't have. He got fired because of it. The presenter whose show he was on got suspended, is still suspended 3 months later. And I spoke up and said, you can't call yourself the home of free speech and then fire people for saying things that are distasteful but not breaking any guidelines and perfectly legal.
And then they let you go too?
And they fired me because of that.
Just for defending him?
Oh, yeah. Just for having loyalty, not just to my friends, but also to the principles that the station that I worked for said it subscribed to. But for me, there's a Christian angle to that, in that if someone said something that is offensive, yet perfectly legal, if you're saying it's immoral, you have to ask the question, immoral based on what? Yeah. Based on what values, right? It's all abstract. They're plucking stuff out there. It was actually based on feminism. It wasn't based on Christian morality. But even if it was, you offer someone the opportunity to repent, to show contrition, to be forgiven, and you forgive them. You don't just snatch them away and cancel them. Otherwise, we are just as bad as the enemy.
That's the irony of this new religion that's coming up, right? It's a mockery of Christianity, and that it demands like a scapegoat, a villain, but it doesn't offer any kind of repentance and welcoming back into the fold. It's what's so scary about it. Now, in England, I see you constantly posting about just how worrisome it is that we're just allowing. Okay, so let me back up a little. I'm watching this documentary on New York. It's a 10-part series, 2 hours each episode, and so many of these episodes are based on the richness of the cultural inheritance of all the immigrants coming into New York, right? So in the early 20th century, you have Europeans coming into New York. You have the Irish, you have the Italians, you have the Germans. They're all flooding into New York, and it makes New York almost like a European city. So the whole documentary is kind of trying to prepare you as if the immigration that's happening now is the same thing. But when you have Europeans coming into America, you're bringing Christians into America. So even though there might be cultural differences in how Italians and the Irish live, we all believe the same core principles and the same God. But when you start bringing in Islam and things like that, there's going to be a culture crash that happens. And I'm watching it happen in Europe, and I'm watching it happen in America.
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrible here. We've got open borders, essentially, and we've got a liberal mindset that teaches that it's a good thing to have open borders, and because we've heard for the last almost 60 years now that if you are against open borders, you're a racist or you're a xenophobe or something like that. Or even from Christians, it's like, do you not want to love your neighbor? Do you not care about the sojourner? And it's like, well, first of all, you do know that means traveler, and that's someone who is temporary. It doesn't mean someone who is permanent. But also, of course, we cannot help our neighbors if we don't help ourselves, and we don't have neighbors if we don't have borders. Then we're all just one, and nations and tribes are God ordained, and so our borders are important. But also, look at the history of the church. Look at the way God revealed himself to us through the individual, through the family, through the nation, and then wider abroad. Like, you have to follow the same path. We have to look after the individual, the family, the nation, and then wider abroad. all of this is common sense, or it was common sense. And now we've got a point where, most of our politicians, most of our civil servants, they are bleeding heart liberals, and they genuinely think they're doing good by opening the borders. And that first and foremost, there's no discernment there. So I would, if I was a politician, I'd say, okay, look, of course it's good to help refugees, people in war zones and living under persecution. But firstly, if we're going to take refugees into our country, let's take refugees from Christian countries, or Christians that are being persecuted, like in southern Sudan or northern Nigeria or Armenia, who share our faith and share our values. But instead, we're taking on board hordes of Mohammedans, essentially, who do not share our values, do not share our culture, and in fact hate us, hate our values, hate our culture, hate our way of life, yes, and want to, in effect, conquer us, because that's what their faith teaches them. And we're taking them on board. We are literally inviting the barbarians through the gate. The gate is wide open. They're no longer at the gate. And we're coming about our own demise.
Well, you said something interesting there, because you said they're doing it because their heart is in the right place, right? Like, you think that this is so I have a hard time believing that, because of what I see with especially in America, with the southern border open right now. Like, I really don't worry about Mexican or South American immigrants coming in who are Catholic. It does not worry me. Mm-hmm. What I worry about is the Muslims coming in, because I do think there's a culture clash coming, but I feel like they are doing it intentionally. I think that the biggest obstacle in the way of this globalist agenda is probably the American Constitution. The American Constitution, the idea that it allows free speech, the fact that it allows us to have a Second Amendment, I think that is the biggest obstacle to them enforcing this globalist agenda. And I think they are purposely trying to destroy this country so that they can just do away with the Constitution. It really worries me, because there's no other explanation for just allowing millions of people to flood into. I mean, even Democratic governors and mayors who are supposed to be on the same page as them are complaining and saying, we can't handle this anymore, and they're still keeping it coming in.
Yeah, there's two sets of people. So when I say they're bleeding heart liberals, I'm talking about the politicians and the civil servants. But above them is the Machiavellian globalists who do want to. There is a replacement in practice. There is, because in the West we are not breeding, to put it quite crudely. Yeah. We're not having we're not starting families. We're not having babies. In England, I think the average birth rate is 1.4. So it used to be 2.4. So at least the father and the mother would replace themselves. Now it's not even that. It's half that. And so they're worried about the GDP, because they worship mammon. And so they have to replace native Westerners with people who breed more rapidly and are more controllable in a different way.
Yeah, it's verboten to even speak about replacement, right? Like, you get in trouble for acting like, but it's something that's actually happening, because you see guys like Elon Musk talking about the replacement rate, or just the fertility rate. If you're not at least replacing it, you're looking at a demographic cliff that's coming up. And you see something like that happening in Japan, where they don't have enough children to replace the older people. And in a place like America, where you have things like Social Security set up, if they don't have a fertility rate that can replace that, your whole economy will collapse. So you think that's part of it, that they just want to make sure they have a replacement rate, and it's not that they actually want to replace the culture? Because I think that they just hate Christianity so much that they are willing to align themselves with anyone who is against. I mean, you see, look at liberals. I mean, you see things like Queers for Palestine. Are these people insane?
Yeah, that's just stupid. But I don't know if it's they that hate Christianity, but I think a lot of this is the work of the enemy, who of course hates Christianity. And if you are trying to have a war with God, what do? You destroy the things that help people believe in God. So the family, the nation, the church, wider society, all centered around Christ. We call it Christendom. Some people call it Western civilization. You destroy those things, don't you? And that's what they're doing. They're broken down the family. It's no longer a husband and a wife. It's two husbands or two wives. You stop having children, and then you promote surrogacy. Child blooming. What's the word? What's the word for can't think of it off the top of my head. But anyway, and you promote mass abortion in certain communities. You just promote everything that is opposite what is good, but you paint it as good, and that's how the enemy works.
It's funny because we all talk about the nuclear family, and it really goes back further than that, because it really used to be you would have the grandparents, the great grandparents, the parents, the cousins, and you would all live. The parish community would be the center. So you'd have the church as the center. You'd have all your cousins and family all around, and then it really, you think about how much technology changes things, because the automobile changes that, right? So now people are able to go live a half an hour away, and it leads to the suburbs being built. And now we get this term, the nuclear family, but the nuclear family is a very new thing. It used to just be the family, and you would have a much wider thing. So even the idea of a nuclear family is the beginning of the falling apart of it.
Yeah.
When do you think, because we talk about the West and Christendom and things like that. So if you look back in the early church as it's going, they had this notion that it was going to be Christendom was a real thing. So the idea of Christendom was there was going to be one empire that covered the earth. So it was really the idea of one church and one empire, because you have all these pagan nations that are out there, and as Christianity spreads, they incorporate them in. But what winds up happening, instead of there being one empire, is you get subsidiarity. So you'll have the nation of England, you'll have the countries of Italy, and they're all individual nations, but they all still have the Christian faith, the Catholic faith. Do you think, what's your view on the Reformation and its effects on where we are today? Do you think the Reformation was a net positive or a net negative? Do you think it's kind of led to some of the things we're in today?
No, I don't see the relation between the two. I don't think the Reformation was a net positive. I don't think it reformed the church. I think it split the church even further, and that's never a good thing. I think the church does need to reform, constantly needs to reform, and there needs to be introspection to avoid error and heresy. Of course, the gates of hell will never prevail against the church, but that doesn't mean the church can't fall into problems, as we've seen many, many times over the centuries. But I think where the reformers went wrong is that they ended up either leaving or being forced out of the church, so the impact wasn't made that could have been made, and that the church doubled down with the Counter-Reformation and the Council of Trent and all of this stuff, just really forced Christians apart. And then instead of having one universal church, or even two by that point, we ended up we've got hundreds of churches now. In fact, people make new churches up every day. I'm constantly getting people in my mentions saying, "I don't need a church. I've got the Bible. That's all I need. I've got Christ. Just me and my personal relationship," or things along those lines, which of course we know to be untrue.
It's the spiritual but not religious, right?
But even Christians, people think they can interpret the scriptures by themselves, and of course you're going to fall into error and heresy that way, because you need the church, because that's how we the Bible is the ultimate authority, but we interpret it through the church. We can't do it by ourselves, otherwise we're making idols of ourselves. But yes, so I think the Reformation did a great evil on the church, but I don't think that's had the same impact on society. We still see lots of Christian countries pre and post. So I think it's more.
I kind of think that the spirit of revolution that comes out of the Reformation then goes into, then it comes to ripping down every monarchy, because once you throw off the authority of the Pope, now you want to get rid of all the monarchies, and it puts the spirit of revolution into the air, and that leads to the American Revolution, then the French Revolution, and it really gets rid of. England's like the last one who was able to keep the monarchy intact without a revolution. I'm surprised they were able to do that with the spirit of revolution that was in the air at the time.
Yeah, perhaps. Someone's saying you don't have liberalism without Protestantism. I'd say it's the other way around. I'd say you don't have Protestantism without liberalism. Liberalism makes everything about the individual, and freedom is all about your own personal identity, whereas obviously Christianity is all about submission to God, and that's where we get our freedom. So from liberalism, we get Protestantism, not the other way around. For Lily W, I hate those comments. Literally hate them. They're so annoying. For your information, Pope Leo declared the Anglican orders. You think I've never heard that before? Like, the thing that really gets on my nerves is when people paste the most obvious things that everyone knows and think that somehow they're enlightening you. Yes, I'm very much aware of that. This is why we brought it up in the conversation. My point was that if you've got to look into why Pope Leo XIII declared Anglican orders null and valid, and then you'll see that actually he said the form and the matter and the intention have to be valid. So the intent has to be there for the real presence. The form has to be there for the sacrifice of the mass. If they are there, that makes it a valid mass. And he looked at Anglican liturgy at the time and said, actually, I don't think the form is there. But I would say that was a mistake, because if you look at the form of the Book of Common Prayer that he was looking at the time, and then look at the form of like what the liturgy of Gregory the Great was using, you'll see almost identical form. So if you are to say that Anglican form was incorrect, you would say actually, therefore, the whole of the Roman Catholic Church doesn't have apostolic succession. This is an argument that I think has been debunked, but I think people who just quote these things without looking into any depth don't really have an argument other than just wasting my time.
Yeah, it's a hard position you're in, right? Well, first off, people are going to say to me that I'm not challenging you enough, because that's what they're going to say.
Do.
But, well, no, it's so I would okay. So what makes you decide to go the route you went then? Because I think we touched on it a little bit before, but was it simply just because you think they were the only ones that were going to be able to let you exercise your ministry? Or
I'll get to that, but here's another one. Look, here's another one. Mater Dolorosa says Robinson's not a real priest. Now, this is what I mean about Roman Catholics entering schism without realizing it, because Mater Dolorosa, I'm assuming she's Roman Catholic by the Ave Maria in her icon. Now, the Catholic Church recognizes my orders as valid and my sacraments as valid, recognizes me as a legitimate priest. Therefore, if she doesn't, she is not following the teachings of the church. This is what I mean when people don't think, they just say things. And it's like,
yeah, you could
what
say
you're doing is you're causing division. You're not helping bring the body of Christ together.
You could argue, I mean, she could argue that you are in schism from the church, but not that your orders are invalid. Your orders are valid. So I would say your orders are more valid than even maybe the Anglican orders would be valid, because you went the route you went.
From your perspective, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that Anglican orders are invalid, but then I don't have to recognize the authority of the Pope. And you do. Therefore, you have to see Anglican orders as invalid because the Pope declared them null and void. But my point is that it's important to know the reasons that he did that, rather than just to state, oh, someone told me once that that's null and void. But yes, I do agree that from a Roman Catholic perspective, my orders are more valid than Anglican orders, just because they have the same legitimacy as Eastern Orthodox orders, which are clearly recognized. But schism
and they come down from a valid apostolic succession. What liturgy do you actually celebrate? Do you use the 62 Missal? Do you use the Anglican Ordinariate? Like what liturgy do you celebrate?
At the moment, I use Ordinariate because I think it's the most reverential liturgy outside of the Latin Mass.
Okay.
I think it's far more reverential than the Novus Ordo. I think actually, if you look at the Ordinariate, it pretty much is the Sarum Rite, but in English, right? So it's essentially the Latin Mass, but in English. And I think that's what the Novus Ordo should have been. That's what Vatican II should have been. It should have, if you want to take the Vulgate and turn it into the vernacular, you don't take bits out of it, you just translate it, right? And you keep it in its fullness. That's the great mistake of the liturgical reforms of the 60s to me. And that's how I think that we know that the enemy was involved in those reforms, because it stripped apart important parts.
Yeah, if I was elected Pope in this hypothetical world, what I would do is I would make every priest return to the 62 Missal in English, so they could use the they could use the common language, but they'd have to do it in go back to the original Missal. I mean, it really goes way back.
Well, there you have it. Just make the ordinary use an extraordinary form, or even make that the ordinary form and keep the Latin Mass as an extraordinary form. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You've got it.
Yeah, I think that you think about what they did in the 60s with changing the liturgy like that, and it just really ripped the foundation out from people. I think to sit there and say that it was just cultural things that caused the falling away of the faithful from Catholicism without discussing what they did in the liturgical reforms is just naivete. It's like, it's crazy. It had absolutely a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
So let's see. Okay, so I would argue against your point. All right, so I would say that I think I got to go back to traditional Thomist comment, because you said, what is it? Okay, so you said it was liberalism that caused Protestantism, right? So I guess there is a way, I guess, that you would have that spirit already exists, and that's what causes the Reformation, right? Like that
Who's good on
liberal.
this? Father Felix Salvani is good on this in his book Liberalism is Sin. Highly recommend it. Just that once you start nipping at bits of the truth, you end up focusing on the individual, and then it leads to liberalism, whether we've defined liberalism by that point or not.
What do you think? What do you think the future of the Anglican communion looks like? Because it's really getting pretty crazy over there, right? Like, I mean, once you introduce a female priesthood, once you start talking about allowing, man, like what happens to that? Like, because you had mentioned earlier, like ecumenism is a dirty word for trads, right? But ecumenism, in its proper sense, should always be about bringing people back into the one fold of Christ, and
Absolutely.
not just the conversation for the sake of not dialogue for the sake of dialogue, right? It should be always about bringing people back towards the truth. So where do you think the Church of England goes from here?
Yeah, I think that's right. The dialogue should be about bringing people back in, and I think, we touched on this earlier, and I said that I think the future of the church. Actually, I don't think it will look how we think it will look. I don't think it will just be, for example, Eastern Orthodox folding into Roman Catholicism and then everyone's part of one church. I think the future of the church will look something different to what we suspect, because God has a bigger perspective than we have. And somehow the East and the West will be reunited. That will be the one true church again, as one body, not split. And I think as a result of that, all of the Protestant denominations will just fall away. They are falling away. The more you splinter, the more you split, it continues and continues until it's nothingness. And that happens everywhere. Anglicanism became Methodism, and baptism, and non-denominational, and it just goes on and on and on until it just disappears. So I don't think that's too much of an issue. Anglicanism in general is bigger than all the others. So there's a possibility that Anglicanism could eventually fall back in with Orthodoxy and Catholicism as well. But I don't think the Church of England is a part of that. The Church of England has gone too far, and I don't think it will survive past my lifetime, to be honest with you. But the Anglican communion in general is much bigger. There are 85 million Anglicans around the world, most of whom are Orthodox in their faith.
Well, you look at what happens with the Anglican split, and King Henry VIII makes himself supreme head of the church. But when you have King Charles in there now, I mean, how can he be the supreme head of the church when, like, he's not.
I've got to challenge you on that. He's not the head of the church. Like, the king's never been the head of the church. The king's just the supreme governor. But that was pretty much how the Catholic Church worked. Most of the kings throughout Europe were the ones who selected their bishops. It was never actually the Pope who selected the bishops. That's a relatively recent papal authority. All that happened is that the Anglicans split from papal authority entirely. So it didn't put the king as a new pope. He doesn't have any power or authority over the church. But we separated, and that was, of course, that was a great shame. But that left the country without a relationship with Rome. But it didn't put anyone else in the Pope's place.
Yeah, I'm looking at it like the trajectory of. I mean, look, you're seeing it within Catholicism too. You're seeing we're supposed to be standing against this thing that's approaching all of us, right? I mean, this is why people actually do love hearing you talk, because you were courageous enough to have a voice and stand up in public, risk being, basically the idea of excommunicated from society to speak the truth, where we have. In Catholicism, you're having the hierarchy starting to flirt with bringing these ideas into the church in some way. Now, like this last document, Fiducia Supplicans, yeah, okay, fine. The church clearly restated what marriage is, but the idea that they're giving this impression that the church is softening its stance to some of these things, when the church is supposed to be the thing that speaks the most clearly on it, is itself very problematic. And you're seeing it throughout the entire world, where it's just
throughout the West. This is West. It's a Western church problem. And these pope-splainers who say, well, the doctrine hasn't changed actually, or I think they're Pharisees because they're legalistic and they're looking at the doctrine as a document. Actually, Catholics have always believed lex orandi, lex credendi, right? That we believe what we preach and what we practice and what we pray. That is the doctrine. If we practice something, if you go to Father James Martin as a couple of gay guys and get blessed together on which looks like a gay marriage, essentially, doctrine has changed. There and then.
In practice.
Yes, in practice, that's how it works. And then that continues until everyone does it. And then before you know it, 100 years later, it's always been done. So therefore the doctrine has changed. We don't need a papal encyclical to change doctrine. So the pope-splainers are wrong on that. But the Western church as a whole is falling. And it's a great shame to see that Rome is copying what the Anglicans are doing in this regard of following the world instead of leading the world.
You saw today, Francis said, this is not dogma, but it is my personal belief that, or he said something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, and I know he's the Holy Father, and I'm not supposed to, but he said something along the lines of, it is my personal belief that hell is empty. I like to believe this. And it's like, you're the Pope, and you're giving people the impression that hell is empty. But that kind of puts in perspective every single thing he has done throughout his papacy, right? So if he believes hell is empty, now that means he doesn't believe mortal sin separates you from God. And he doesn't think that anything he doesn't believe in mortal sin, essentially. So of course he's trying to incorporate, and it's just, don't worry about what people do. His idea of being pastoral. What does a pastor do if not lead someone to Christ and away from these sinful lifestyles? It's absurd.
It's fluffy. It's very fluffy. I've seen the pope-splainer say, well, actually, no, he's not saying that hell is empty. He's saying he wants hell to be empty. And of course, we should all want hell to be empty. Yes, of course we should. But at the same time, as a preacher, as a pastor, as a priest, as a bishop, as a pope, we should be teaching that hellfire is real. And you are at risk of eternal damnation unless you live your life a certain way, unless you have faith in Christ, you receive the sacraments, and you repent of your sins. Eternal damnation is a very real possibility, and you will be judged upon your death. Therefore, repent of your sins, have faith in Christ, and receive the sacraments. That's what he should be saying. Not actually. I like to think hell is empty, and it's just fluffy, but it's risking souls.
It's just not going to convert anyone.
No.
I mean, you really have to think, especially men, right? You see the crisis. We talk constantly about the crisis of masculinity, because what is the church saying to make men want to change their lives and live? Because we really are called to live radically different if you become Christian. And the church is just silent on this, and they're just constantly trying to feminize it and bring more women into it. And when you do that, you actually repel men from wanting to even have a part in it.
But not just that, and I'll get to that. I just want to say thank you to Doris Front Desk for a nice comment, because I just keep seeing this Lily W who gets on my nerves. She's putting lots of nonsense. I'm not going to even address them anymore. But
I wouldn't even acknowledge. I
want to call out a nice one. Doris Front Desk, very nice. The problem is femininity of the church, absolutely, and it goes back to it's incarnational. Men and women are different. We've always known that to be true, and that's not to say we're not equal in terms of dignity and worth, but we are different in our roles, in our callings, and men tend to be, this is a generalization, but we live in a generalized world, men tend to be more rigid with their theology. Women tend to be more emotionally flexible. So the moment you introduce femininity into the church, and we've seen this in the Anglican church as an example, you get women wanting to liberalize the faith in order to be more all-encompassing, to be more inclusive. And of course, we shouldn't talk about the horrible stuff because we want these people to come in and feel warm and fuzzy. And it's like, no, the church has to be masculine in order to prevent error, to prevent heresy, to keep the truth static, and to lead people to it, to him.
Well, this is the biggest problem with why you can't have men with same-sex attraction be priests.
Hey, it's Chris Tomlinson. How you doing, Chris? Sorry.
I think this is the biggest issue with having men with same-sex attraction become priests, right? Because if you have that attraction, there's obviously a father wound there. and you have an issue with masculinity in itself.
Yes.
So how can you be a spiritual father when you have that deep wound in yourself? And now what happens is you have, because what really happens in the church, in my opinion, I mean, this is obviously just speculation, but it seemed like once you get men in positions of authority with that inclination, they start pulling up other men with that inclination.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden you have an entire church. It's almost like a club of men with that inclination. Yeah, it's like, and now you have women being brought in, and now you just have this feminized church where, like you said, it's just all about inclusivity. Don't say anything that's difficult. Don't talk about the hard part of being Christian. Don't talk about contraception. Don't talk about pornography. Don't talk about any of that. Let's just not offend anybody. Don't worry about it. And then you wind up getting this milquetoast, mediocre version of Christianity that converts no one. And that's what's left so many Christians converting to Islam, because at least, I mean, you look at a guy like Andrew Tate, right? Andrew Tate converts because he says it's more difficult, like, and men want to be challenged.
Yeah, I see Baratus in the chat as well. Hey, Chris, I love your work. The truth is offensive, Anthony. This is it. We can't try to not be offensive because the truth is offensive. The gospel is scandalous. That's the whole point of it. It's supposed to wake us up to the truth, who is Jesus Christ. And I'm going to say something that's going to upset the trads again, but I'm not doing it to upset the trads. I'm doing it because I think this is the truth. The reason the church is so gay right now and so effeminate right now is because of a tradition that needs to be addressed. So in the church, if we look at the church fathers, they used to talk about, a priest should be chaste the night before celebrating mass. The priests used to be married. In many traditions in the Eastern Orthodox Church, they still are. And I know there are married permanent deacons now in the church, but I think it's a tradition that needs to be addressed in the Roman Catholic Church, the chastity of priests, because people are called to many vocations in life, and a lot of people feel called to holy orders, and then they have to weigh up that calling against their calling to start a family. And people often drop out in discernment at seminary and actually go and choose to start a family instead of being involved in a gay church. And then you have, on the other hand, you have people who don't feel called to start a family, who feel the tug of same-sex attraction, so they don't have that dilemma. So, and then if they feel that they are called to holy orders, they go to holy orders. So people who are gay end up becoming priests. People who are straight end up starting families.
Yeah,
I think that's a very troubling.
So you think that the Catholic Church should open itself up to a married priesthood?
Yes, I think it should return to the tradition of the church, which is, Catholicism is about protecting tradition, right? And at some point that tradition was changed, and it's been changed for so long now that trads see it as the way that things have always been done, but it's not, of course, the way things have always been done. And I think it has been damaging for the church. We have a gay church.
Well, okay, so I think
all the way up to the top.
This is a good topic that we could jump in on. So, okay, I think that at one point in time, especially in history, when it was so unacceptable to have same-sex relationships, I think that you had a lot of men who had that inclination would go to the priesthood to avoid this, the scandal of why aren't you married? Why aren't you so they would go maybe into that vocation to hide some of these inclinations. Now that obviously would have disastrous consequences. You're in the confessional with young men, things like that. But I think that there could be an avenue for a married priesthood. Like I don't think it should be a universal thing, though.
Right.
I think there could be maybe an avenue for it, because I do think that it might give it opportunity for some married men who actually believe the Orthodox faith. But I still think because you have those priests and bishops in positions of authority, they wouldn't allow those men up anyway. Like, I think that's a major problem you would have. It would make priests more effeminate. If they spoke up, they could get canceled and lose their benefits for them and their family, which is a true point too, right? So part of the reason
that's true regardless, because if you speak up as a priest, you lose, you get sent off to the Timbuktu, or you lose your stipends and you lose your house, or you lose your nice
right. But now if you have a family that you're responsible for too. So part of the reason for the celibate priesthood is, especially if you look in times of like a time of war or a time of persecution, the priest can go and put himself in harm's way without worrying about abandoning his family. And I mean, you as a priest, you have to know more than we would how demanding the role of a priest is, right? You're getting called out in the middle of the night to go and give extreme unction.
Yeah, but
you
at the
know,
same time, I know many married priests in the ordinariate who manage it very successfully. I think callings aren't universal. So people who are called to missions in dangerous parts of Africa might not be the same priests that are called to a married life in a parish, in a humble, suburb. So I think, again, you're right in that it shouldn't be universal, but I don't think it should be prohibited.
yeah, I think
But this is
even the
just, again, I
Orthodox.
knew it would be an unpopular opinion with the
No, it's
trad.
I don't honestly. It's a conversation I actually like having because I've explored it before. Where there's I don't. Well, we already allow for married priests in the Catholic Church if they come in from through the ordinariate or something, right, or something like that. Like there
Yeah.
are slight exceptions to married priests in the Catholic Church.
So all the comments of people saying you can't serve two masters, you'll be distracted by a family, blah, blah, are they saying that priests who have come in through the ordinary are lesser priests than celibate priests?
I don't know. I think that the church's tradition would have been that even when married men became priests, especially early on, maybe I think I've heard that like even when Benedict was allowing for this, he talked about how spouses would agree to be chaste, and not be together, even if they were married or whatever. Like they would actually agree to no longer share the marital bed once the husband became a priest, things like that. I attend an ordinariate, and we have one of the greatest priests I've ever encountered in my time as a Catholic. Is he married, Chris? And he's married. Yeah, he's married. Yeah, look, you look at Father Dwight Longnecker. He's married. He has a bunch of kids. I mean, the other thing would be, would they have to receive higher pay because now if they're not practicing contraception, they're going to have 8-9 kids, things like that, But yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I'm not someone who thinks right off the bat there should be absolutely no exceptions for it. I think there can be, and I think that there's a possibility that you'd wind up getting a bunch of Orthodox married men proclaiming the truth, and maybe that's a way to restore the church. Pope Benedict spoke in that 1970 radio address about the church in the future will lose a lot of its public its public adoration, and it would become a smaller church, but it would become a church of saints, a church that is much more holy, and men that would be priests would be men with day jobs and things like that, because they wouldn't be this ability to have seminaries and things like that. Yeah. So that could be the future of the church. We really don't know.
Yeah. I know many priests who've got day jobs. I know many priests who are married, and they're very good priests. I just want to see more of that. I want to see more masculine priests. When I look at FS and Tuccio, I just see gayness infecting the church in a very negative way. And anything we can do to help prevent that, I'm not saying it's going to solve it, but anything we can help to see more masculinity in the priesthood would be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think there should be a channel maybe made for it. I just worry that if they give that ability, that it would just become the norm. That's the problem with all this stuff, right? Like, so they make an exception for communion in the hand, and next thing you know, communion in the hand is the norm. And that's the danger of it. If you allow this little avenue for something like that to happen, then it just becomes the norm, and that's it. And now the celibate priesthood is gone, because even the Orthodox don't allow their bishops to be married, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right. I think it's expected that if you're married as a priest, I can't remember the ins and outs. I don't want to quote something and get it wrong. Goodness me, I love the comments in your.
You want to just play around with the comments a little? We can go with this.
How would getting married make you a Protestant? Being Protestant would mean you're against the Catholic Church or don't have the sacraments. Getting married, that doesn't necessarily. Anyway, some of these people are unthinking. Control your urges. Yes. That's
John B. Married Catholic priests would just be Protestant. No, that's not true. I mean, that's not true. But celibacy, I do think, is masculine.
Oh, celibacy is a very good thing. Yes, I'm not saying celibacy is not a good thing.
It is masculine because when done properly, you're controlling your passions, and they're actually the true romantics. Because I'll tell you why celibacy, especially in the modern age, is very important. We're dealing with a culture that says if you can't sleep with who you want to sleep with, you can't be happy. Yeah. Okay. And a celibate priesthood shows you don't need to have sex to be happy. you can actually experience all the joys and glories that God has to offer you as a person without sex being a prerequisite. And that's what really, I mean, that's how I always viewed the celibate priesthood, especially in our modern age where everybody's telling you love is love and go sleep with who you want to sleep with.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What, you know, so the celibate priesthood is actually the one saying, no, I'm going to forego this natural good for something that's eternal and beautiful.
Yeah, no, that's a slightly different conversation. I'm with you on that. Celibacy is important and very good. And St. Paul talks quite a lot on this, in that marriage is there for those who can't be celibate, but celibacy is a holy path. I think he's right. But I also think we live in an age where Christians need both. We need to remind Christians that there are two callings. One is celibacy and one is family. But promiscuity is not a Christian lifestyle. And the world will tell everyone that it is. And yeah, you're right, in order to be happy, but it's not just about being happy. It's just in order to be ordinary, to be normal, you have to sleep around and try before you buy. And it's just none of it is crazy. Good.
I see it as a return to, I mean, people think they're being original with this stuff, but it really is just a return to the practices of the pre-Christian era.
Yeah. God bless you, Psalm 51. Have a good morning prayer.
Did you read Tom Holland's book, Dominion?
That's on my pile of shame. It's on my bookshelf. It's on my list of books to read at some point.
So I don't agree with his later thesis. You know, after obviously I'm Catholic and I don't like his conclusions post-Reformation. But watching, especially in those early chapters when he talks about the ancient world and he's showing what these ancient cults were like, it's actually pretty wild, the similarities to what we're seeing now, where you have the priests of Cybele wearing women's clothing, cutting off their genitals, like people would bring their children to go and see. It's drag queen story hour brought back, and you're seeing, and what happens is, as you see Christianity spread, you have priests going throughout the world preaching the gospel, but also having these processions with incense and warding off evil spirits. And Tom Holland doesn't pick up on that because he's writing it from a secular perspective, but you could really see that's what's happening. As Christianity spreads, God's spirit covers the earth, and you see these demons just getting restrained by God.
Yeah, Jonathan. Sorry, go on.
No, yeah. Oh, yeah. You can. What's his name? Jonathan Cahn, right?
Yeah, Jonathan Cahn's book really touches on those, doesn't he? The old gods, and they're returning. The pagan gods, they are back, and we see this in the end of civilizations. That when we get debauched and degenerate and celebrate things that are to our own detriment, that's the downfall of a society. And we are at the downfall of Western society. This, Western civilization has peaked. We are on the downward trend, and it's only a matter of time now. Unfortunately,
do you think we're just at the end of the West, or do you think we're upon something apocalyptic?
No, it's just the end of the West. If you look at continents across the East, we see that Catholicism's still growing. We see that people are still going to church, if more now than ever. Actually, it's just over here we're decadent. We've had it too good for too long, and we don't really have any major wars in living memory anymore. I used to see this as a teacher. We used to get people in, Holocaust survivors, to talk to the kids and give them a real experience. All of that is gone, and we don't know what it means to have to fight for what we believe in, which is maybe that's why we're going through this.
And what do you think replaces the West after it's gone?
I don't know, but I'm hoping that Christians will have a hand in it and it will be something better. Because I talk about this quite a bit, but another name for the West is Christendom. And if you take Christ out of Christendom, you don't have much left. And the foundation that the West was built upon was Christian values. So take those values away and it all just crumbles. You can't have a house without foundations. That's where we are now. We've been living on we've been running a car on an empty tank, and it's coming to a stop.
Yeah, that's why I don't like the term the West, right? The West, it just has too many different connotations to it now, where it's, if you look at what the old world order would have been actual Christendom, where you had, because the separation of church and state is actually what has led to the downfall of the West, where if you no longer have a culture that worships Christ as king, and that's what's happened by separating church and state completely. It's like it doesn't mean you have to have a Catholic state, but separation of church and state. I mean, I would prefer it's a Catholic state, but like when you separate religion completely and you separate Christianity from the state completely, now you no longer have a highest good that is God, like the Christian God. So what is your highest good? Your highest good is now diversity. Your highest good is now inclusivity. And this is what's been devastating to all of us.
Yeah, again, it comes down to a misunderstanding of separation of church and state. It meant that the state cannot interfere in the church, but the church was still expected to be there. That was implied. And actually, it is the church's job to provide the moral values for the state, because without them, like you say, they're just scrambling. It's all abstract. They're making up values. Human rights. Human rights are based on what? What do these rights mean? You know, in the UK now, we have the right to broadband. How is that a right? And rights used to come with responsibilities. We don't see the responsibilities to our rights anymore. And again, rights used to be God ordained. You know, we had the right to life. We have the right to private property. These things are scriptural. And without believing that they're God ordained, they just come from man. So if they come from man, man can take them away.
Yeah. So you stopped doing podcasts now, huh?
Yeah, I'm having a break. I was saying to you before, I've done half a dozen a week for nearly 2 years. It's great. It has been good, but I need a break from it. I think I'm going to take a break from social media as well. Social media is just getting to me. Like just these comments, people are so intense right now, and not always in a constructive way. I feel like I'm feeding into that as well.
That's why I wasn't even reading any of them.
No, I don't mean these comments in particular. There've been some lovely ones as well, but it just means social media in general. I need to take a step back from it all and just, you know, I've tried to fight the good fight as best I can. It seems it's not good enough for a lot of people, so let them get up and let them stand up for a while, and I'll take a back seat and just focus on my little parish.
Well, I'll tell you, like you and I are having this conversation as close to face as we could, right? Yeah. And people are saying things in the comments that they would never say to somebody's face if they were in person, right? Especially behind the cloak of anonymity, you will say awful things to a person that you would never say if you're face to face. People will tell me on this that I was a coward for not challenging you one thing. I just know I'm not going to change your mind on something. I know you're looking into these issues yourself, and the only one who actually converts hearts is God anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So there's nothing I'm going to say to so why would I want to have you on to have an adversarial conversation? I honestly just wanted to pick your brain a little bit and see what you.
Michael said he should pray the rosary. I do pray the rosary every day, Michael. Sorry to butt in there.
That's the irony of it, right? We'll be held accountable for every word, folks. Type carefully. Rash judgment is a big deal. I agree with that. 100%.
And I'm not judging other people on this, by the way. I'm judging myself because I feel I'm getting more irritable lately. I'm not having as much patience. And, you know, I pray to God for patience, but he doesn't make us more patient. He just puts us in situations where we need to be more patient. And that's where I feel like my online presence is at the moment. So I'm zooming out of it all.
So you're going to take a little bit of a break. And then do you have any plans to maybe step back into public ministry again? Or you think you're done with that?
I don't know. We'll see. I'm in London for another 6 months. And then I'm moving. I don't know where I'm moving to. So I'm praying and discerning through that at the moment. So if you could keep me in your prayers, I'd appreciate that. I'm trying to find where God is calling me to be next. And that might mean more media ministry. It might mean no media ministry. It might mean just a full-time parish somewhere. I do know that I no longer feel called to be in London because I've hated London for years, but I've always felt called to be here. I've felt I've needed to be here. I no longer feel that. So I'll be leaving London. I'm just trying to figure out where now.
Hey, what do you think of Marian apparitions? Have you ever looked into any Marian apparitions?
Yeah, I used to go on pilgrimage to Walsingham every year. So Our Lady Richaldis had an apparition to rebuild the Holy House. And so we go on pilgrimage to the Holy House and pray there. But I'd love to get out to Medjugorje at some point. I'm trying to make it happen because I think I know, again, your audience might have split views on that. But I think if there are current apparitions, it would be wonderful to encounter that.
My parents went to Medjugorje back in the 90s, and my father went there as an atheist, and he came back believing the faith, and he came back a Catholic. My mother, so I had 3 siblings at the time when my parents went. My mother goes while she's there. She gets convicted to no longer use artificial birth control, comes home. And there's 8 years between my brother Mikey, my brother Joey, and then my mom has 5 kids. in the span
Wow.
of 7 years. So I have 8 siblings now, and whatever your opinions on Medjugorje are, if it wasn't for Medjugorje, 5 of my siblings would not exist.
That is a wonderful testimony.
Yeah, so I've one of my brothers, my youngest brother, I actually talked to him and I'm like, look, I'm like, if it wasn't for Our Lady, you don't exist. And it had to do with his conversion, like him coming back to the church. I'm like, you need to at least consider the story, because if it wasn't for Mary, you don't exist, you know?
Yes.
So it wound up leading to his conversion and him coming back to Mass and stuff. So, but Calvin, I appreciate you coming on, man. I know you're a busy guy. I pray for the future of the church in general. If people are uncomfortable with my approach to this interview, I just wanted to have a conversation with Calvin
I think you did
Robinson.
great, mate. Yeah, thank you. You did great. Don't listen to the haters. The haters are always going to hate.
I honestly had to get to that point doing this show, because you'll never make everybody happy, and I refuse to be audience captured.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not going to do things based on what the audience wants me to do. So
Yeah.
we've kind of never been an adversarial show. I'm not going to have somebody on and fight with them unless it's set up in beforehand, in that, hey, we're going to have a conversation and argue this topic. But for the most part, I just want to get on and have a conversation with other Christians and see if there's any commonalities we have, and just, we got to rebuild Christian society after this whole thing comes down, which, unless it's about co-sleeping.
I think that's a great attitude, because I prune my audience at times as well, and because I think if you fall into that trap of chasing numbers and worrying what your audience thinks, you say what you think they want to hear, and of course we shouldn't be doing that. We should be proclaiming the truth, and the truth naturally attracts people anyway. So yeah, I'm with you, brother. Focus on the truth.
All right, I'm going to let you go now, guys. Okay, so what I have coming up, Thursday night, Rob and I are going to have Nick Cavazos on. Then Saturday, we have Father Maudsley coming on. Now, Father Maudsley's show is going to be mainly on locals, because we're going to be discussing a sensitive topic, the conversion of the people of the Old Covenant at the end of time. And then we have Brian Holdsworth coming up the week after. We got a lot of big shows coming up. So, guys, please subscribe. Go check out our locals, and we have a few things coming up on that. Calvin, you have anything you want to promote before we go?
I don't know, but if people could hold me in their prayers, that'd be fantastic, and I'll be praying for you guys too.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for coming on, Calvin. Wait, now I have to figure out. Rob, are you in there?